What's up, heathens? How ya doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a new apologist on YouTube named Evan Wilkerson. Recently, Evan put up a video where he's going to be facing atheism and our objections to miracles. Of course, the only objection to miracles that we have is that there's no verifiable evidence that any miracles have ever happened. So I'm very interested to see how Evan is going to face this aspect. If y'all want to fuck around and find out how we're totally wrong in our objection to miracles, then please stay tuned.
Many Christians going into college will hear their atheist professor say something like, the Bible is a myth. There's so many miracles in it, it's basically a fairy tale.
I'm not exactly sure which colleges he's talking about, or what classrooms he's talking about, or what professors go by what they do or do not believe. I don't know which ones he's talking about, but that has not been my experience in college, nor has it been the experience of anybody that I know. Can you just imagine walking into a calculus course in college and the first thing you see on the board is the teacher saying, the Bible is bullshit, it's full of miracles, and therefore it's a myth. Like, you just don't see that in college classrooms anywhere, not even comparative religion courses or religion courses in general. You would not see somebody writing on the board that the Bible is bullshit. So right off the bat, he's kind of presenting a straw man argument about what you experience in college. I kind of get the feeling that all he did to kind of prepare to talk about the common experience of college students is watch God's Not Dead. And if that's what he did, that is a poor way to prepare. I would just actually talk to some college students.
Hearing this, you'll probably be shaken up and not know how to respond. But before that happens, here's a reason why atheism ultimately fails as a belief.
I gotta stop you right there really quick, because atheism is not a belief. That's a hard no from me, because atheism is just being unconvinced in the proposition that God does exist. I don't find sufficient evidence to believe in a God, so therefore I don't. That's all that atheism is. Until you can provide evidence that can definitely prove that a God does exist, I will forever remain unconvinced of the God position. So I feel like this is kind of strike number 2 for this guy on presenting straw man arguments against atheists.
It assumes that God doesn't exist before it investigates if miracles are possible.
Here's strike number 3, because atheists don't just assume that miracles are impossible, or they don't just assume that God doesn't exist. There are a small portion of atheists out there that were never religious growing up, and that's fantastic. But for the majority of atheists out there, we come from a religious background. So we have definitely listened and believed to the biblical narrative or whatever religion was dogmatically presented to us as children. The key point to take away here is that we don't just automatically assume that miracles are impossible or anything that he just said. The reason why a lot of people become an atheist is that they have investigated the evidence for God, and therefore we are not convinced that he does exist. Separately, we have also investigated the miracle claims, and we have determined those to not actually exist either. Any miracle claim that has occurred in the past has eventually been perfectly explained with a natural explanation. If we have a natural explanation, then we don't need a supernatural explanation, and natural explanations are always going to supersede supernatural.
But it's the Bible that shows us it's only because God exists that miracles are possible.
Sorry to stop it so quick. Basically, you have to presuppose that God does exist in order for miracles to even be possible. This is vastly different than how atheists view this particular topic. We view miracles and God to be somewhat separate, because miracles can happen without your particular God existing. All it takes is the supernatural to exist. That doesn't even require a God to be there in order for the supernatural to exist. So for miracles to happen, all we need is the supernatural to be real. We don't even need God, because not only do atheists have to argue against Christians like Evan here, But we also have to argue against a plethora of other religions that also make miracle claims, that also make claims about the supernatural being real. So we have to somewhat decouple the supernatural from God. While God may exist in the supernatural is a much wider topic than one single specific definition of God.
But before we tackle these points, let's simply ask, what do atheists believe? Atheism is essentially a disbelief in God. What most atheists do believe in is naturalism, that nature is all there is. In other words, what you see is what you get. The mountains, the trees, oceans, planets, stars, the universe is all there is. In other words, there is no supernatural, no souls, no spirits, and no God.
Well, for one thing, the majority of atheists don't say there is no God. It's just that there's no sufficient evidence to prove that a God does exist. So we withhold belief in that particular topic or that particular subject. We just don't believe a God does exist. That's not some kind of hardline statement that God doesn't exist. Although some atheists out there do make that particular argument, I prefer to go with the more reasonable position of I just don't believe it. But I'll tell you what I do believe. I do believe in shit that I can see and experience, and that's exactly what naturalism is about, or materialism is also another word that apologists like to throw out. The material world is all that exists. And I am a material girl. But the reason why is because we can actually experience these things. We know that these things exist because we can touch them and feel them and taste them. Whatever other sensation you want to experience this reality with, we can actually do that. But for the supernatural, we don't have that. Like we regularly don't experience the supernatural. There are some people out there that feel like they do experience the supernatural, but like I said before, supernatural occurrences, like in the past that we've labeled as being supernatural, we've been able to sufficiently explain them with natural explanation. And if we can do that, then there's no need to place the supernatural label on it because it's perfectly natural. So I guess fuck me for only believing in what I see, that I'm not gullible enough to just accept what somebody tells me is true without being able to actually observe or experience that truth.
Because atheists believe that nature is all there is, science is the main method they use to understand reality. And as a result, many scientists find their meaning in life by searching the unknown and providing humanity with new ways to thrive and evolve.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with using science in order to understand reality. Now, he talks about how people use science to find meaning or to provide meaning. I mean, I don't exactly experience that. I don't know if anybody out there does, but using science in order to understand reality is a good thing because that's what we do in our daily lives. I mean, we use science every day in order to experience what reality has. So I don't understand the whole shitting on the scientific method or shitting on scientifically minded people when we all use the exact same stuff every day in order to understand our reality. It's just that Christian apologists like Eben here like to go a step further and tries to speculate about things that exist outside of this reality. And I just don't see the benefit.
Here's the problem. When atheist scientists survey the data and evidence about the universe, they only look at some of the evidence, not all of it.
This is a misrepresentation of how science works. Science doesn't disregard information. In fact, I would say that's what Christian apologists do. They regularly ignore information in order to hold on to their preconceived notions about reality, which include God, miracles, the supernatural, a Jew rising from the dead. But for all of these things, they will disregard facts of reality in order to hold on to those ideas. That is exactly the opposite of what scientifically minded people do. Scientifically minded people want to take in all of the information. They don't want to rule anything out without good reason to. And the reason why I have ruled out like supernatural explanations as being the most likely or the most plausible or probable explanation for anything is the fact that there has been no supernatural event in the past that has overcome a natural explanation. The natural explanation has always superseded the supernatural. So it seems to me like it's the most reasonable thing to do to disregard supernatural explanations because our experience has been that the natural world is all that exists.
What do I mean by that? Well, they're looking at the evidence only in nature to tell them everything about existence. They're making a prejudgment that only nature exists, and so they exclude any idea or possibility of the supernatural.
Again, no, we don't. We just try to look for explanations for why something has happened. That's all scientifically minded people do. I know we're speaking about atheist scientists, but I kind of think atheist scientist is rather a ridiculous label. A scientist is a scientist, or at least they should. Their faith should not enter into the laboratory. Whatever kind of room they use to investigate their field, it shouldn't enter into it. Now, you do have organizations out there like Answers in Genesis or that Ark Encounter place that claim to be scientifically minded or look at the Christian worldview through a scientific lens or something like that. But if your faith is intruding into your scientific workspace, then you've already compromised whatever in the fuck you're doing. Faith requires you to ignore facts of reality in order for that faith to stay stagnant. Otherwise, facts of reality would fuck that faith up. But I also think that it's a bit funny and ironic that he's sitting here saying how scientists, or what he claims is atheist scientists, presuppose that the supernatural doesn't exist or that God doesn't exist or anything like this. That we presuppose these things. When he himself started off by saying you have to presuppose that God exists in order for miracles to be a viable option.
At the core of it, many atheists assume that God doesn't exist before they investigate the supernatural. So if miracles happen, they'll immediately think of how to explain it in a strictly natural way. Here's an example. Many times in my Christian walk, I've heard testimonies of people who are not going to have the money to pay for rent or a certain medical bill. They'll need something like $300. Then they'll pray for help, and in some instances, they'll miraculously find an envelope at their door containing the exact amount of money they needed. This is a miracle, especially since the money came in the context of prayer.
Honey, what are you doing?
Praying?
You're praying?
Yes.
What are you praying for? Oh, so you're praying for God to make the tomato sauce?
No.
So this particular thing right here is a little awkward for me because this was not how I was taught as a Christian that God fulfills prayers or even does miracles. And I confirmed this with KC about what she was taught because we both grew up Catholic. She was a better Catholic than I was. But I conferred with her and we both agreed that this is how we were taught. We were taught that God fulfills miracles by influencing the natural world to provide whatever we were praying for. For instance, you wouldn't pray for money to come to you in this particular situation. You would pray for God to give you an opportunity to get the money, or you would pray for somebody's heart to be moved by the Holy Spirit to give you the money, or something in that way. You would not pray for like money. I mean, that would make God a counterfeiter, and that's illegal. Yeah, money doesn't just go poof and just magically present to you. Yes, honey, it would be great if it did. That would be awesome. I'm sure a lot of people would definitely believe in God made money appear. Talk about some prosperity gospel shit right there. But what he is trying to say here is that God has somehow fulfilled this just because somebody prayed for it to happen and then it happened and therefore is a miracle by God. Now, I'm not exactly sure if he's trying to suggest that God poofed this money into existence, thereby counterfeiting it, or maybe he made it disappear out of a book he's holding or something. I don't know. But apparently God made this money appear. Only for a certain group of people, though. Like in some certain situations, God has fulfilled this request for a little bit of that free cash. I don't know what God's criteria for it is. I'm sure that he would say that we can't know God's intentions. So all we know is that a person prayed, the money appeared. Hallelujah. But I find that the natural explanations for how this money could have ended up on the doorstep of that person to be far more likely than God magically poofing that shit into existence. A neighbor could have heard them praying for it, or just a neighbor could have been talking to them and they could have, told them what, financial problems they're running into. Hell, somebody could have run a GoFundMe for these fucks and then gave them the money anonymously. Who knows? Who knows how it could have happened, but it was definitely somebody that knew that they needed the money and therefore gave them the money anonymously. It didn't just appear on the doorstep by itself. It has a natural explanation to it. And circling back around, this is how we were taught, KC and I, as Catholics, that God answers prayers, because you don't ask God for physical items. You don't ask him for a bike or a car or money or anything like that. You ask God for things that are abstract and intangible. The will to be a better person, or the mental strength to do something, or praying for God to take care of another person in one way or another, whatever that means. Doesn't mean fabricating money and putting it on their doorstep. So it's a little odd how he's using this as proof of miracles when there are far better natural explanations for how that money could have gotten.
If you've been a Christian for long, you've probably heard of many miracles, but an atheist would find a natural explanation for it.
Oh, fuck, he figured us out. Honey, he figured us out!
Like the neighbor heard the person praying and so felt bad and provided the money anonymously. Or the person praying forgot that they had just mentioned it to a friend, and the friend provided the money. Here's the thing, just because an atheist can come up with a natural explanation doesn't mean it best accounts for what happened.
I'm sorry. That statement was a bit too stupid for me to really handle. Any natural explanation is going to be more likely than whatever supernatural explanation you can come up with. Because the natural explanation uses the natural world in order to explain it. Since our experience is that the natural world actually exists and these things actually happen, like a neighbor feeling pity on their broke-ass neighbor and giving them money, is a thing that happens in reality. That makes it far more likely to happen than God magically pulling it out of his ass and putting it on their door. You think God has a big butthole, honey? I'm sure God could shit out a lot of money there, hon. God's got a moneymaker in his butthole. That's the new supernatural theory there. God bent over and shat out the money right on the doorstep. That's obviously more reliable or more likely than a neighbor just giving them the money. Obviously. Fuck me, I should have known.
In fact, Christian author Lee Strobel took a survey in the United States that concluded over 94 million people said that they've had some type of an experience that can only be described as a miracle. In other words, 94 million say that there's no natural explanation for the experience they had.
I mean, I really don't understand why you think that this is a reliable measurement of how many miracles do occur. I mean, these are literally just normal, everyday people saying, you know what, I can't explain it, but my dog had puppies and there ain't a dog for miles around here. This is like some kind of virgin birth for puppies. Every single one of them mutts is probably a Jesus Christ for the dogs. I don't understand why polling 94 million Americans who are already Christian and them saying, oh, there's no other thing to explain why my daughter got pregnant. It's obviously a miracle by God because she doesn't have sex. And that is a real non-zero statistic out there. There is a non-zero statistic of virgin births. People who say that their baby is a miracle and they did not have sex in order to produce the child. That is let that sink in. That is a non-zero statistic out there. So the fact that Lee Strobel asked whatever audience he has, I guess maybe he went around personally to everybody and asked them, is there something in your life you can't explain, if not for God? And 94 million people said, yeah, sure there is. Without providing us specific descriptions of instances or anything like that, I find this to be a very empty sort of piece of evidence. It doesn't prove anything. It proves that there are people that are gullible. It proves that there are people that are too lazy to think of a natural explanation. That's all that it proves. Lazy ass fucking Americans. This is not a surprise.
So what's the point? As Christians, if we're challenged by the idea that the Bible is a myth because there's miracles in it, don't be discouraged.
Sorry to stop it so quick again. That's not why we disregard the Bible. We disregard the Bible because, for one, the Bible is the claim. Two, there's nothing really historical in the Bible. There are hints of historical things in it, like places and names of people that we definitely know existed at the time, things like that. But As far as relaying accurate information about the Messiah of the Jews, we can't trust anything that the Bible says about this Messiah figure, Jesus, as the Bible would call him. We can't trust it because we can't verify anything that's in it. It doesn't cite any sources. It only cites scriptures and visions as sources. So that's why we disregard the Bible. We don't disregard the Bible because it has miracles in it. All of the miracles that are performed by, let's just say Jesus, because he's a Christian, all of those miracles can be traced back to the Old Testament. So basically, there were a bunch of Jews that were reading the Old Testament in order to get information about the Messiah figure of Judaism. And that's exactly what Paul tells us he did. He read the scriptures. Also, Josephus, he talks about the Jews doing this, as well as Philo of Alexandria directly demonstrating that he was doing that. So it seems to me like the miracles that are contained in the New Testament are all fabricated from the Old Testament, but this is because of direct evidence that we have from multiple different sources. And that's why I disregard the Bible in the context of miracle. But it's not because it has miracles that I originally disregard the Bible, if that makes any kind of sense.
Atheists say that miracles are impossible because they assume God doesn't exist. But what if we assume that God does exist? Then would miracles be possible?
Well, I mean, yes, if you presume the Christian God exists, then the Christian God has done miracles in his book. Like, he claims to have done miracles in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So, yes, of course, if you presuppose that your God exists, then miracles are definitely possible, if not probable. But the problem is that you have to presume that God exists. You have to presuppose that your particular God exists before you can even start to prove it. If miracles are proof of your God, but you have to presume that your God already exists before you can even investigate whether or not these miracles happened, it just seems like a big circle jerk to me.
This is one of the points that the Bible makes. One of the most ridiculed stories by skeptics is the story of Exodus, where God saves Moses and the Hebrew people by bringing plagues to Egypt and parting the Red Sea. The atheist doesn't see in natural terms how this could be possible, but this narrative is trying to tell us why miracles are possible. In Deuteronomy 26, 6-8, the author writes, "And the Egyptians treated us harshly and humiliated us and laid on us hard labor. Then we cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice, saw our affliction and our toil and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great deeds of terror, with signs and wonders."
I get it, that the Exodus is a compelling thing for this apologist, but it's not all that compelling to me nor any other skeptic, secular person that I know. This is not because it's a miraculous claim of Moses parting the sea and making it rain frogs and giving everybody bad rain. That's not the reason why I disregard it. It seems like at every single turn in this video, Evan seems to recontextualize why atheists reject these types of stories in the Bible as being solely because of the miraculous claims that it makes. This is not how, at least not for me, this is not how I initially investigated like the Exodus. That there were a bunch of millions upon millions of Jews in Egypt who apparently after several plagues happened, that there was this great exodus where Moses, parted the sea with God's farts. I understand how this seems to be very miraculous and everything like that. But if you actually look at the evidence that exists that we know of, there was no parting of the Red Sea. There's no evidence to suggest that the Red Sea parted or that the Egyptians were swallowed up by the sea after God got his people through this makeshift land bridge that he did with his farts. There's no evidence of Jews being that numerous in Egypt or even as slaves that built pyramids and other things in Egypt or were driven by hard labor. There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of the plagues hitting Egypt. Nobody wrote anything down. There was nothing at the time that said any of this. And we know that if there was a great exodus like this, it definitely would have been written down in the Egyptian records because we have several instances of slaves escaping and everything like that from the Egyptian culture, and they hunted them down. We still have records of this today. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to think that this is a historical event or that this event ever happened when there's no evidence to suggest that it did. If there was evidence for any of the miraculous claims of the Bible, and there was no other way to explain why locusts would fall from the sky, why frogs would fall from the sky, or why water would turn to blood. If we couldn't figure any of that out, I would have to result to just as simply, I don't know what happened, because it's a historical event. There are a lot of historical events that we just simply don't know what happened, and it's okay to not know things. It's not okay for Christians to not know things, though. It seems to be a pretty big problem for a lot of apologists and just general Christians out there to have to say, I don't know what happened. So it's not because it's a miraculous claim in Exodus. That's not it. It's that there's no evidence to suggest any of it happened. That's the reason why we reject it.
You see, these miracles happen because God was revealing that he really does exist. As Moses says to Pharaoh, these things happen so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. Because God is all-powerful, not bound by the laws of nature, miracles are no problem for him. And he shows this consistently throughout the Bible and in our modern times.
I agree that if God does exist, miracles should be no problem for him. If he crafted this entire reality and entire universe, then he definitely should have the power to reach in and do weird things with it, right? He should be able to rearrange like the laws of physics and everything like that. But the problem is that we don't have any evidence for that. And that's the crux of it. It's not that these are miraculous claims and we have presupposed that the miraculous claims could never happen or that they are impossible. I think that it's incredibly hard to prove that a miracle has happened because you have to prove a suspension of the natural order of reality. That's incredibly hard to do. I don't know what it would look like in order to prove it, but if there was a suspension of the natural order of reality, then we should definitely be able to prove it. A good example of this is like the event horizon of a black hole. It was hypothesized and theorized by people like Einstein about what would happen near the black hole, the event horizon of a black hole. And we've been able several times in the past prove these different hypotheses and how the laws of physics break down near the event horizon of a black hole. We also know that these same laws of physics would break down the closer and closer we get to the beginning of the universe. Because the laws of physics wouldn't have come into effect until after the expansion of the universe. So it seems to me if there was some kind of suspension of the natural order of reality, we would be able to detect it. If God has ever done a miraculous event, we should be able to detect when he does one. We should be able to analyze these miraculous claims that Lee Strobel supposedly has 94 million of them. We should be able to analyze them and try to determine if there was a suspension of the natural order of reality. The problem is that every time we look into these miraculous claims, they are always, universally, always explained by natural explanation. So I agree that if God does exist, miracles would be no problem for him. The problem that apologists like Evan here has is that he has to presuppose that God does exist in order for miracles to become possible or improbable, in which they will then in turn prove that God exists. And that's that's textbook circular argument.
So when we take an honest look at the evidence, we will see that God exists and has indeed worked in supernatural ways. Let's review. Number one, when you're faced with a challenge that the Bible is a myth, don't be shaken by it. This challenge comes from a place of cynicism towards the Bible and miracles.
No, it doesn't come from a place of cynicism against miracles in the Bible. It comes from a place of just acknowledging the fact that there's no evidence to support the events of the Bible. There's nothing to suggest that the Bible is telling accurate history or anything of that nature. That's the reason why. Not because we're cynical against the Bible or miracles. We're just cynical against bullshit.
Number two, if God exists, then miracles are no problem. God is spirit and he created nature, and so he can work in and through it as he pleases.
I can agree with this point, but that also means that we have never experienced any miracles whatsoever. And therefore, we cannot say that God exists because miracles exist. I get that he has a totally different view of this because he thinks that miracles happen on a daily basis. 94 million Americans apparently experience miracles, so therefore God exists. I get that that's his logic, but I just am not convinced by circular fucking logic.
Number 3, the Bible writes of how God revealed himself through his miracles, giving more reasons to believe in him than not. Christians can take the knowledge of the Bible and the experiences we have to this day to show that miracles happen because God has authority over both the natural and the supernatural.
So I like how his very last point here is basically saying how circular the argument actually is. Because he's like, God revealed himself through miracles, but you have to presuppose that God exists in order for miracles to happen, and therefore miracles prove God. And it makes a really nice circle. It's almost like he was at one of them drawing boards with a compass, and he just sort of perfectly drew a circle with the compass. And then he said he freehanded it. Well, that's going to be it for Evan's video today. I have to say that I was not impressed by it, not impressed by the argument from miracles. I've seen this argument come up multiple times over the past few months, that miracles prove that God exists. But the problem that I have with this argument is that, like Evan demonstrated, you have to presuppose that God exists in order for miracles to be possible. And I'm not ever going to be convinced by circular logic. I think that if God were to exist, miracles should be no problem. But I think that you have to work from proving first that miracles exist, and then you would have to work on proving God exists. You don't start with God and also end with God. That's just not how that works. You've got to start somewhere. You can't end where you start. That's just nonsensical. But in any case, if you heathens will, please go down below. Let me know what you think about the argument from miracles. Do you think that it has some substance behind it? Or do you think that it's a really bad argument like I do? Let me know down below. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.